Black elderly man was humiliated for his skin. He said 5 words that made the SWAT team freeze. Leonard Grayson was just an old man on a bench until a SWAT team surrounded him for simply existing. But when he stood up and calmly spoke 5 words, the entire force froze. And what happened next sparked a nationwide reckoning. This isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. Please, before you start watching this story, support us by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Downtown Atlanta buzzed with the energy of a weekday afternoon. Horns blared in traffic, food trucks lined the street, and city employees on their lunch break clustered around park benches, sipping coffee and chatting. Amid the crowd, one man sat alone, quiet, still, and invisible to most. Leonard Grayson, 77 years old, rested on a worn bench near the Fulton County Courthouse. His coat was old but clean, his shoes polished with care. He had a quiet dignity about him, the kind that came from decades of battles, both in the world and within himself. In one hand, he held a small paper bag with his medication. In the other, a folded letter from his granddaughter Olivia, a defense attorney working nearby. She had invited him to lunch. Leonard wasn't homeless. He wasn't sick. He was just early. Always had been. He believed in punctuality, especially when it came to family. But to Brent Daniels, the courthouse's newest private security hire, Leonard looked like a problem. Brent was in his early 30s, eager, uptight, and full of assumptions. He had only been on the job 2 weeks and was still trying to make an impression on the courthouse regulars. When he saw Leonard sitting quietly near the entrance, his first thought wasn't concern, it was control. He strode over, hand resting on his hip like he was itching for action. "Sir," he said curtly, "you can't sit here. This bench is for visitors waiting for court appointments." Leonard blinked slowly and looked up. "And that's exactly what I am," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'm waiting for someone." Brent didn't like the tone. "You can't just loiter here, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Leonard didn't move. "Young man," he said with a slight tilt of his head, "do I look like I'm causing trouble?" Brent bristled. "That's not the point. I'm asking you nicely. Please vacate the area." Leonard exhaled. "You're not asking. You're assuming." Brent stepped back and grabbed his radio. "Security to dispatch. Possible loiterer at courthouse west entrance. Non-compliant. Send backup." Leonard shook his head in disbelief. A woman walking by paused and looked on. A man sipping coffee stopped mid-step. Something didn't sit right. An old man sitting calmly, suddenly surrounded by suspicion. Within minutes, a cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, serious and alert. Brent briefed them as though Leonard were a threat. "He refused to move. Says he's waiting for someone." Officer Malone approached. "Sir, can we see some ID?" Leonard reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a wallet. "You can, but you won't like what it says." As the officer opened the worn leather wallet, his eyes widened slightly. "Leonard Grayson?" "That's me," Leonard replied coolly. Before anything else could be said, a low rumble echoed down the street. A SWAT vehicle, coincidentally nearby for a security drill, pulled into view. All Leonard did was raise his eyebrows and whisper, "Now this is just embarrassing." The crowd began to grow. Phones were recording. Tension filled the air. And Leonard? He just sat there, still silent, waiting for the storm to pass. The moment the SWAT vehicle pulled up, a hush fell over the area. Pedestrians froze. Store owners peeked out from their shops. Phones came up in unison, recording the scene like it was a movie. Leonard Grayson didn't flinch. Officer Malone glanced toward the arriving unit, clearly unsettled. He leaned down toward Leonard and asked, "Sir, are you carrying any weapons or anything that could be considered dangerous?" Leonard looked up at him with eyes that had seen wars, marches, and riots. "The most dangerous thing I have is patience," he said calmly. Brent Daniels, standing a few steps back, was sweating now. This had escalated beyond what he expected. He hadn't anticipated a SWAT team, and he definitely hadn't anticipated a crowd questioning him. "Why is he being treated like a criminal?" someone asked aloud. "He's just sitting there," another voice said from behind a phone camera. Did he break a law or just offend your bias? Officer Malone shifted uncomfortably. The crowd was right. There was no cause for an arrest, no law had been broken, but protocol demanded caution now that SWAT had arrived. Leonard slowly reached into his coat again. Several hands reached for holsters, and a few officers shouted warnings. "I'm just pulling out my phone," Leonard said, voice even. "Relax, gentlemen." He held the phone up, pressed a few buttons, and handed it to Malone. "Call my granddaughter," Leonard said. "Her name's Olivia Grayson. She's a lawyer, works 2 blocks down at the Prescott building. She'll clear this up real quick." Malone looked skeptical but took the phone. He stepped aside to call while the other officers kept a wary eye on Leonard. Brent, now pale, mumbled to the SWAT team commander. "I didn't know he had a lawyer in the family." The commander, a tall, stern woman named Sergeant Ellen Reese, narrowed her eyes. "Did you ask? Or did you just assume he was a threat?" Before Brent could answer, Officer Malone returned with the phone still to his ear. "She's on her way," he said, nodding slowly, "and she is not happy." 5 minutes passed, but it felt like 50. The tension, the eyes, the silence. It was thick. Then Olivia Grayson arrived. She came walking fast in heels, her black blazer whipping in the wind, her legal ID badge swinging at her side. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She walked straight up to her grandfather and hugged him. "Grandpa," she said, voice filled with restrained fury. "Are you okay?" Leonard patted her hand. "Fine, baby. Been through worse." Then she turned, eyes blazing, toward the officers, the SWAT team, and Brent Daniels. "Who's responsible for this?" she asked, scanning faces. "Because I promise you, someone's about to be held accountable." Brent tried to shrink into the crowd. Sergeant Reese stepped forward, hands behind her back. "We were called in due to a misunderstanding." "This," Olivia said, pointing to the scene, "is not a misunderstanding. This is racial profiling in broad daylight." The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. Leonard adjusted his coat and said, just loud enough for the officers to hear, "I told you she'd come." The crowd had grown, phones still pointed. Tension was still high, but now it had a new edge, one shaped by outrage, not fear. Olivia Grayson stood in front of her grandfather, fuming. The courthouse security, local officers, and SWAT members all stood frozen, unsure of their next move. Brent Daniels tried to explain himself. "Look, I was just following protocol. He looked out of place. I didn't mean..." Leonard turned his head slowly and cut in with a calm, tired voice. "Son, you didn't follow protocol. You followed prejudice." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brent opened his mouth to argue but couldn't form words. Olivia stepped forward, inches from him now. "You humiliated a decorated veteran, a community leader, and a retired professor, all because his skin made you uncomfortable." "Veteran?" Sergeant Reese blinked. "Professor?" Leonard didn't say a word. He just reached into his coat one more time, this time producing a small, folded certificate and a laminated ID. Olivia handed them to the sergeant. Reese took the documents and read aloud. "Leonard James Grayson, Vietnam War veteran, Bronze Star recipient, retired history professor, Morehouse College, volunteer mentor for at-risk youth." Her voice trailed off. No one said a thing. Then Leonard stood, slowly and deliberately. His voice rang out, steady and clear. Just 5 words. "I fought for this country." Not loud, not angry, but powerful, delivered with the weight of a man who had once crawled through jungle mud and marched across broken streets just to be seen as a man. Every officer, every security guard, even some in the crowd, they froze. Brent couldn't look him in the eye. Sergeant Reese lowered the documents and turned to the officers. "Stand down! Everyone, stand down!" The SWAT team backed off, their leader nodding slowly. Officers eased their hands from their belts. The mood shifted instantly. Olivia, never taking her eyes off Brent, said, "You're lucky my grandfather is a patient man, but I'm not." Brent stumbled back. "Look, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to do my job." "No," Olivia snapped. "You were trying to do your version of your job, the version where black elders on benches are threats. You humiliated him in public. You escalated it until he could have been another headline." Leonard raised a hand gently. "Baby, let it go." "No," Olivia said firmly. "Not this time." A woman in the crowd called out, "You don't have to let this go. We saw everything. Someone send that video to the news," another voice said. Leonard turned to face the crowd. "Folks, I appreciate the support, but let me ask you something. How many more times do we need a camera before common sense kicks in?" The crowd fell silent again. This time it wasn't tension, it was reflection. Olivia linked her arm with his and whispered, "Let's go get lunch." Leonard nodded. "I've worked up an appetite." They walked away together, past a stunned line of officers, down the steps, and into the city, still dignified, still standing tall. By nightfall, Leonard Grayson's name was trending nationwide. The video, barely 2 minutes long, had been uploaded to multiple social platforms. In it, a composed elderly black man sat on a bench, surrounded by law enforcement and a SWAT team. Then, with unmatched grace, he stood and said 5 words that punched through the noise of America's tired excuses. "I fought for this country." The internet lit up. Comments flooded in. "How many more Leonards before we fix this? This man is more American than half the people who called for backup." The dignity, the patience, the power of his words, "I'm in tears." Major news outlets picked it up overnight. By morning, CNN, NBC, and even international channels were discussing the incident. Headlines ranged from "Retired professor wrongfully targeted" to "A veteran's grace exposes modern bias." Olivia didn't sleep. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from friends, reporters, and even civil rights groups offering to represent her grandfather pro bono if he chose to press charges. But Leonard, he slept just fine. And when Olivia showed up the next morning, stressed out and pacing, he was already in his small garden behind the duplex he'd lived in for 40 years, trimming his rose bushes. "Grandpa," Olivia said, stepping outside, "the world's on fire over that video." Leonard looked up with a small smile. "Took a video to make folks care about something I've lived with for decades. Ain't that something? You could sue the department, file a discrimination suit. The mayor's office called me this morning. They want to meet. Grandpa, this is your moment to speak up on a national stage." He wiped his hands and walked toward her, setting the shears down. "Liv, I'm not looking for attention. I just wanted lunch with my granddaughter." "But the system is broken," he finished for her. "Been broken. But baby girl, change doesn't come from lawsuits alone. It comes from people refusing to look away. You want to fix this? Use your voice, your platform, your law degree. Not just for me, but for all the folks who didn't have cameras." She nodded, eyes wet. "I'll go with you to that meeting," he added, "but not to demand anything, to remind them who we are." Later that day, Leonard and Olivia walked into the mayor's office, where city officials waited nervously. The mayor herself, a white woman in her 50s named Catherine Doyle, stood to greet him. "Mr. Grayson," she said sincerely, "I want to start by saying I'm deeply sorry for what happened. It never should have." Leonard shook her hand. "Apology accepted, Mayor. Now let's talk about making sure it doesn't happen again." As the meeting went on, Leonard spoke not with anger, but wisdom. He called for better training, stronger accountability, and most importantly, a shift in mindset. "I don't want performative justice," he said. "I want preventative justice." By the end of the meeting, there was no question. Leonard Grayson had become more than a symbol. He had become a voice too wise to ignore. 3 days after the meeting at City Hall, Leonard Grayson found himself seated before an entirely different crowd, one filled not with officers or bystanders, but with journalists, community leaders, and local politicians. The mayor had arranged a press conference, and though Leonard had hesitated at first, he agreed when Olivia reminded him how many others could be helped if he spoke. The conference room at City Hall was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters sat scribbling notes, and live feeds ran across major networks. Leonard sat at the long table beside Mayor Catherine Doyle, Olivia, and a civil rights activist named Marcus Ellington, who had flown in from Washington. The mayor stepped to the podium first. "We're here today not only to apologize to Mr. Leonard Grayson," she began, "but to acknowledge the systemic issues that allowed such an incident to occur in the first place. We cannot undo what happened, but we can ensure it never happens again." Then she motioned to Leonard. He rose slowly, walked to the microphone, and adjusted it gently. The room fell completely silent. "I didn't want to be here," he said plainly. "I wanted a quiet afternoon, a sandwich, and some time with my granddaughter. But sometimes life decides to tap you on the shoulder and say, 'It's time again.'" He glanced at Olivia, then back to the crowd. "I've sat at counters where I wasn't wanted, marched in places where dogs and hoses were the greeting. I didn't speak up back then because I was angry. I spoke up because silence was killing us." He paused, letting the words settle. "What happened to me was embarrassing, yes, but it wasn't new. It wasn't unique. It happens every day, just without the cameras. And that's what must change." The room was completely still. "I'm not interested in punishment," Leonard continued. "I'm interested in prevention. I want officers trained to understand the people they serve, not fear them. I want policies written with understanding, not suspicion. And I want my grandchildren to sit on any bench in this country without being seen as a threat." Thunderous applause broke out. Olivia wiped her eyes. Marcus Ellington stepped forward. "We're not just going to leave this as another viral moment. Mr. Grayson will now serve as a senior advisor on the new city task force for equity and policing reform. Because voices like his should not be sidelined, they should be leading." After the conference, reporters crowded Leonard, but he kept his answers brief. "I'm not a hero," he told one. "I'm just tired of seeing the same story written over different names." Later that evening, as the sun dipped over the city skyline, Leonard and Olivia sat on the same bench where everything had started. This time, no one approached him with suspicion. Instead, passers-by waved. A young boy even stopped to say, "Thank you, Mr. Grayson." Leonard smiled. "You see, Liv," he said softly, "sometimes the best seat at the table is the one you build yourself." While Leonard Grayson's words were echoing through newsrooms and classrooms across the country, Officer Brent Daniels sat alone at his kitchen table, the glow from his laptop casting long shadows on the walls. He had watched the video a dozen times, not because he wanted to, because he needed to. Every time Leonard stood up and said, "I fought for this country," Brent's chest tightened. He couldn't hide from what he'd done anymore. His inbox was flooded with hate mail, his badge was under review, and the department had placed him on unpaid leave pending a full investigation. His own father, an Army vet, had called him and said, "Son, you disgraced our name." Brent wasn't a monster, but now that seemed irrelevant. He'd made a decision rooted in bias, one that nearly escalated into national tragedy. And now, for the first time in his 10-year career, he questioned whether he deserved to wear the uniform at all. Still, there was one thing he couldn't stop thinking about: Leonard's composure. The way the man had handled being surrounded, accused, and humiliated without raising his voice. That wasn't weakness. That was strength Brent knew he'd never possessed. He needed to speak to him. 2 days later, dressed in plain clothes and holding a small paper bag, Brent stood outside Leonard's front door. It took everything he had to knock. Olivia opened it. Her smile vanished the moment she saw him. "You've got some nerve showing up here." "I'm not here for forgiveness," Brent said quickly. I need to speak to him." "No cameras, no press?" "Number just me." She studied him a moment longer, then turned and called over her shoulder, "Grandpa, someone's here." Leonard came to the door slowly. When he saw Brent, he raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect you." "I didn't expect a lot of things this week," Brent said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I came to say I'm sorry, and not the PR kind, the real kind." Leonard motioned to the porch bench. "Sit." They sat in silence for a moment. Brent set the paper bag between them. "What's that?" Leonard asked. "Peach cobbler. My mom's recipe. Figured it's the least I could offer." Leonard chuckled softly. "You assuming I like cobbler?" Brent looked flustered. Well, I guess I did." Leonard grinned. "Lucky for you, I do." Then his tone shifted. "But cobbler don't fix trauma, son. I know, and I'm not asking you to absolve me. I've spent the last few days trying to figure out where I went wrong. Truth is, I've been scared my whole life of doing the wrong thing, of looking weak, and I used the badge to feel in control." Leonard nodded slowly. "Fear ain't an excuse, but it is a place to start." "You willing to rebuild from that?" "Yes," Brent said, "but I don't know how." "Then you start by listening," Leonard replied. and maybe by coming to a youth mentorship meeting this Saturday. We teach boys how to grow into men, real ones. Brent blinked. You'd let me come? I didn't say I trust you yet, but I believe in second chances, even for the ones who messed up real bad. The two men sat in silence again, this time not from discomfort, but from something like understanding. 6 months later, the park bench was no longer just a park bench. A small brass plaque had been added to it, etched with simple words, "In honor of Leonard Grayson, may we always choose understanding over fear." The dedication ceremony was quiet but meaningful. City leaders, community organizers, and families from all over the county came together to celebrate a turning point that began with a misunderstanding and grew into a movement. Leonard sat on the very same bench, this time flanked by Olivia and a dozen young men from the mentorship group he helped lead. Some of them wore crisp shirts and ties, others were dressed casually, but all of them carried a new kind of confidence. Officer Brent Daniels was there too, no longer as a symbol of shame, but as a student of redemption. After months of volunteering, mentoring, and listening more than speaking, he'd earned a place among those trying to do better. He no longer wore the badge. He'd resigned voluntarily, choosing instead to pursue a degree in community outreach and restorative justice. Olivia had since accepted a new position as head of the city's Civil Rights and Equity Commission. The mayor had offered it to her after weeks of public pressure and recognition of her unshakable advocacy. Olivia didn't hesitate to accept. "I'm not just doing this for my grandfather," she told the crowd that day. "I'm doing it for everyone who's ever been misjudged, underestimated, or treated as a threat simply for existing." The crowd clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Reporters documented every moment, but this time, the story wasn't about a mistake. It was about the progress that followed. As the ceremony ended, Leonard stood up and walked over to Brent. "Still liking cobbler?" he asked with a half smile. Brent laughed. "I think I've eaten more cobbler at your house than I ever did growing up." Leonard leaned in slightly. "You earned your seat, Brent. Keep showing up." "I will, always." The two shook hands, not as strangers linked by conflict, but as men joined by choice. Later that afternoon, Leonard and Olivia returned to the bench once more, just the two of them. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting golden light over the grass. "You ever imagine it'd go this way?" Olivia asked, looking around at the smiling families still lingering after the ceremony. "No," Leonard said, "but I always hoped." Olivia rested her head gently on his shoulder. "You changed everything, Grandpa." Leonard chuckled. "All I did was sit on a bench." "No," she whispered, "you stood up when it mattered." As birds chirped overhead and the breeze rustled the trees, Leonard Grayson closed his eyes for a moment. Not in exhaustion, but in peace. Because in a world where too many stories ended in tragedy, his had sparked a turning point. And it all began with 5 words and a man who never stopped believing in something better. Leonard Grayson's courage turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. From a bench in a quiet park to a movement that changed an entire city, his story reminds us all that true strength lies in standing up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button, share with others, and subscribe for more powerful tales of transformation and resilience. Your support helps us continue to spread hope, one story at a time.